G'day. G'day, Stephen Travis. Live session looking at what causes drawing style. Where does our drawing style come from? How does our drawing style develop? I would love any thoughts or comments or questions. And if you have any other questions that you'd like to ask that may not be directly related to this, then we'll see if we can get to those as well. So welcome. Bit unusual for me. It's a morning session. I'm really doing this today because we had all sorts of problems yesterday with our internet. So I really didn't do anything yesterday. So I thought I was wanting to try a few morning sessions because I am aware, morning my time, because I am aware that for most of the world, that's a very different time to my evening session. So if this time suits you well, then let me know. And not just suits you well, but if you're interested in listening to some of my live sessions, then please let me know. Good morning, Jim from the UK. Welcome. Our drawing style. Is style something that we're particularly aware of? Are you aware of your drawing style? Do you have a sense of, this is how my drawings look, this is the way they're going to look? I have a sense of the technique effect that I'm going to create at the end. Or do you look at your drawings and think, gosh, everyone looks like they were drawn by a different person, and mostly people who don't draw very well? It can feel like that, especially when we start setting out. Hello, Ricardo. Welcome. I spent some beautiful days in Venice and Florence once. Or do you think of drawing style not so much when you look at your drawings, but when you look at the drawings of other people, and you think, oh man, I wish I had their drawing style. I wish my drawings look like their drawings. It's not so much that you're worried about how your drawings don't look the same, how you don't have a regular style, a predictable style, but you really wished your drawings looked like other people's drawings. Why do their drawings look the way they do? And how can you get your drawings to look like their drawings? It's one thing to say, well, I wish I had a consistent style, but we might be saying something more like, I wish my drawings look like this person's drawing. So how can I develop a style that takes me in that direction? Sorry, just wondering what's happening. Is that more the issue? And of course, I'd love to hear where in the world you're watching from. I'm old enough that I'm still amazed at all this technology stuff and the fact that that it's so easy to connect with the world. I guess if you're younger, you'll take that for granted, as always having been the case. So where does our style come from? Where does our drawing style come from? Well, most obviously it comes from the ink on the paper. And look, I'm talking about drawing, and I refer to pen and ink because that's my preferred, at this stage anyway, my preferred medium. But just, apply it to whatever you're talking about, because it really refers to any creative endeavor in the same kind of narrow place. So whether it's paintings that we've done, style is something that should develop. Oh, good day, Ian. Style is something that should develop. And I know that another art style was it was actually what probably got me doing urban sketching. I was looking at a book on an Australian artist, Lloyd Rees, when I was painting, and I wasn't doing any drawing whatsoever. I was painting the large tree canopies and Australian flowers. And I saw I was looking at this book of this famous Australian artist, and it had some there was a couple of sections from the 50s and 60s, 1950s and 60s, when he traveled to Europe, which was a bigger deal then than it is now, and had photos of his drawings of particularly Paris, but also Italy, but particularly Paris. And I just thought they were the most amazing, amazing drawings. I couldn't believe how much he seemed to capture what was happening there. And I'd been to Paris once by that stage, so I had a sense of how it looked, and I just felt that these almost pencil scribbles were brilliant, and it made me want to be able to do that as well. And so when I did go to Europe the next time, which was a long time after the first time, but having seen his drawings, I was hoping that I could do drawings that looked like he'd done them. And my drawings, look, I was happy. I was happy with most of them in lots of ways, but they look nothing like Lloyd Rees's drawings. And so, besides being a bit disappointed, it did get me thinking, why did his drawings look the way he's drawn them, and why do my drawings look the way I've drawn them? And I didn't work it out for a while because I was still doing a lot of painting at that stage anyway. But over time, and particularly when I started the YouTube channel, and so now teaching drawing, I was forcing myself to put things into words a lot more. And look, this is my take on it. It's been very helpful for me. So tell me what you think. It really comes down to what produces the ink on the paper, because it's the ink on the paper that we see. So it's the ink on the paper that seems to show us our style, creates our style, and it does. But the more important question is, where does the ink on the paper come from? The ink on the paper comes from my mind, and that's my mind in the broader sense. It comes from a lot of things, but they all, thank you, Terry, that's very kind. But they all come from observation, thinking, processing, working out what we want to do, then working out how we're going to do that. I reckon that it's between 80 and 90% of our drawing impact comes from before the ink hits the paper. And I think one of the biggest issues that beginners have is the rush to put the ink on the paper. And I don't mean in a big time scale sense. I mean every drawing session that we have our reference or we have our idea, and drawing is ink or graphite on paper. So we rush to start making marks. And the problem is we haven't done the thinking that we need to do to produce probably the sort of artwork we have in our mind, certainly the sort of artwork that we see other people doing, other non-beginners, let me suggest. See, it's not the time it takes you to make the marks that's the real issue in drawing. It's being able to do the thinking that tells you where to put the marks. Hi, Sarah. Where to put the marks and how to put them. The variation between different marks, the positioning, and the overall scene that's the overall scene that we create from it. That's actually the hard thing. And just on the side, that's why it's easier to copy another artist's work, even to copy so well that it looks like it's, you capture their style. Because when we copy the marks, we're only copying, in my mind, the sort of 10% end of the process. We're not having to do the 80, 90% start of the process. And I think people beginning never quite believe this, but the marks on the paper are the easy part. It's knowing what marks I want to put on the paper. It's knowing where I need to put them. It's having a range of options in our head that we can scroll through and select the types of marks that are going to create the overall effect that I want. it's working out the overall effect that I want, particularly when we don't see it in our reference, particularly when it's the sort of photo that doesn't capture well the subject we're looking at, such as a group of trees, where it's often very hard to tell from a photo where one tree ends, another tree begins. It's very hard to tell the depth as well as possible because the further back detail looks a lot sharper in the photo than in real life, and so forth. And so there's a lot more changing we have to make to our reference in our mind to make our drawing ready, easily understood. And so there's all this that happens in our head first. Now, for someone who's experienced with drawing and who's done a lot of things in a very consistent way over a period of time, not necessarily a long period of months or years, but a long period in terms of the number of drawings they've done, that 80 or 90% can look very quick and easy. It can look not very important at all. It can look like they start to draw almost immediately, but it's a bit like going to the doctor and they look at you and can say very quickly what's wrong. Well, they can only say it very quickly rather than have to get their books out and start checking things and looking things up and learning things, because they've spent years and years and years learning this and practicing, if you like, on patience, so that they're able to access all of that training and knowledge and information and whatever processes are needed to sort of juggle it all around very quickly because of the experience they've had. It's exactly the same with drawing. You can't just decide to be a doctor and think that you're going to come up with things as quickly as a GP, someone who's been training, who's been working would. And yet, sometimes when people start learning to draw, it's easy to think that I'm just going to be able to start putting the pen on the paper, and producing something incredible. We can all put the pen on the paper, but the question is what comes back to us from the paper, and not appreciating that the learning process that happens in our mind that tells us what marks to put where. And as I said, this is why it's so much easier to copy a drawing from someone else. There's a number of reasons why it's easier, but the main one is the hard work is the thinking, the working out what to put where and how on the paper. And the original artist has done that. When I copy their work, I'm merely copying their marks. I'm not doing any of the thinking, and therefore I get no training as to how to do that myself. And yet the reason why their drawings look the way they do, it's because of where they put their marks and what marks they use. And all of those things have flowed from their thinking, which I'm not privy to. I have no idea what they were thinking or what choices they had. Couple of comments. Let's just have a look. Hi from Nicaragua. Welcome. That's great. Notice that the style progresses and forms similar to the artist's personality, develops as you're more and more confident in your skill and your own self. Absolutely. I probably don't know enough drawing artists to know if their drawings reflect their personality as such, except in more general sense. But absolutely, confidence is a point I've got for a bit later. But absolutely, when we're confident, because mark making always involves risk, because the mark may not quite work out. It may not combine with other marks. It's a commitment, especially when we draw directly in ink. Every mark is a commitment. Confidence is really important. Being able to move, and that's why perfectionism is so crippling. One of the reasons perfectionism is so crippling when we draw, because it makes us afraid of taking risks, because we become more fixated on not making mistakes, which is a negative, than creating our artwork, which is a positive. And it's the positive, I think, that always births better things in our life. Watching from Texas, welcome, Terry. Done a lot of sketching plein air, but still struggle how much to include and what to leave out. Yeah, it's important to realize that we're in charge when we're the person drawing, but The only thing I'd say was if you draw scenes of subjects that you really want to draw, so you really engage with your subject, then don't leave things out because you think they're too hard. Because, well, at the very start, that makes sense because you don't want to be overwhelmed. But at some point, as soon as you feel that you're ready to start with perhaps some of the more difficult elements of your subjects, it's important to try and include them and not to leave them out. I left cars out for years, well, for a couple of years from my street scenes because they were, in my mind, too hard, which really just meant I'm not really interested in them enough to have persevered with the observation and the thinking necessary to do them well. But at some point, of course, I realized that they're an important part of a streetscape and that my streets all looked deserted and unreal because they didn't have cars or didn't have enough cars in them. And so I learned to tackle them. We only improve with what we practice. So intentionally practice wisely, but we still have to practice. So style develops organically with practice and experience. Yep, I'd agree with that, Ian. By way of inspiring and drawing, my way of inspiring and drawing is incredible. Well, thank you. That's very kind. Great. Look, I hope I do give people confidence because this is a journey, and it's when we're self-taught, when we're basically navigating our own path, which is now so common because of things such as YouTube videos. So we don't have a teacher per se. We don't have a face-to-face teacher. We don't have someone who comes and looks at our work and says, oh, this needs to be that and this and that. It can be easy to think that everyone else can just do it, and we can fall into bad habits with the best of intentions and so forth. So, confidence can be a bit harder to get because we are dependent, in a sense, on the choices we make about who we listen to and what we try to do. And that can work more easily for some people than than others. So look, I would certainly say, and this is a different topic, but I was going to say, be careful what teaching input you choose, because it's not all the same, and some will entertain you more than will teach you, which is fine if that's what you want. The only question is, what am I wanting to get from teaching input I expose myself to? And if I end up with too many teachers, then they're all going to be coming from different places, and I'll have a lot of different voices giving me input, a lot of which may be actually incompatible, but I may not be experienced enough to realize that. And that's the problem, because then I'm thinking that all of this must be useful and must be helpful. And all of it might be to a range of different people, but it won't all be necessarily helpful to the same person, because a lot of it may be going in different directions with a different way of thinking underneath it. Drawn paint for 60 years, don't really think I have a style as such. Do watercolor and precise pen type as I do. Enjoy sketching where I am. Thanks for all that. And someone watching from Dominica struggling on which pencil to use. Experiment and use the pencils that create the effects that you're after. Mariah is the thing. In the end, the pencils aren't magic. They don't produce the artwork. I actually think we place far too much emphasis on using the right pen and not enough on developing the right thinking for whatever pen we use. I just can't. I used to joke when I first started this channel. I used to joke with a friend about how I couldn't believe so many questions. Comments would be, oh, what pen do you use? What pen do you use? Like, what does it matter what pen I use? Just pick up a pen and start. I mean, the pen, look, what we use, there is a point where it can be helpful, but particularly at the start. And by the start, I mean, hundreds of hours of doing it. The pen is such an unimportant part. Doing it's the important part, and having and developing the thinking that tells us what marks we're trying to put and where we're trying to mark them. But if we go, get back a little more directly to developing our style, if we're thinking of drawing comes from our thinking, the marks on the paper are there because not because we've copied someone else's marks, but because our brain has worked out from the reference, it's observed it, it's worked out how are we going to create the effect of this on my paper in some way. And then that tells me where to put my pen marks on the paper. Then clearly my style comes from my thinking. And this is pretty key. If I'm not developing a consistent style, it's because I'm not developing a consistent thinking. Does that make sense? If my thinking, and that includes my observation, and even if I draw from the imagination, what's in my imagination comes from things I have observed previously. It's just that I'm looking at things that are in my mind rather than on a sheet of paper, which is a far more sophisticated and challenging skill to develop, which is why if we want to learn to draw seriously, we have to put into our mind images that we can now refer to. And the big danger is I underestimate the challenge of that, because if I start to draw now, and I've never drawn in my life, and I really say, like trees, I've always enjoyed trees, and I start to draw trees. The problem is and I draw them from my imagination. The problem is when I've observed trees up till now in my life, I wasn't observing them to draw. I was observing them for other reasons. And therefore, even if I really liked them, when I looked at them, I may not have been looking at them to get the information I actually need to have when I draw them. Because when I draw them, there's a much greater commitment needed to a certain way of thinking, certain things we need to see, certain light effects we need to really hone in on. It's one thing to see it, to feel like we recognize it again in life as a tree. It's another thing to see it so that I can create it now on paper with ink. And so a lot of the life memories I have of subjects aren't actually adequate enough for being able to draw them from my imagination. The problem is, if I haven't observed well enough to draw them well in the past, I may not recognize the weaknesses in my drawing. So that's the problem. If I'm in a course and I have a teacher, then the teacher can point that out. It's more of a challenge on a self-taught journey. But so what I draw comes from what I think. And it's been interesting for me because over the 5 or 6 years, 2018, it's going on 6 years now that I've been drawing consistently and intently. My style has changed quite a bit. If you look at the last live session I did last Sunday, I think if you like my style and you're interested in developing your own style, to look at, because I actually show some drawings from early on when I first started doing freehand ink drawings for YouTube videos, and just looking at the way my mark making changed compared to those first drawings to some of my most recent ones, and choosing some of my more recent ones that I think start to have a strong consistency in how they look. Really interesting, I found, doing that to a few of you are about to get some ads soon, so please, for my sake, watch them. Thank you. Developing a consistency that's so different to how I first did. And the reason it wasn't just that the marks I put on the paper were more accurate in my more recent drawings. It's that when I look at my first drawings, I can see that my thinking was hugely different. So have a look at that last live session and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. If you don't want to watch it all, you can just scroll through it and just see the drawings I show. No, sorry, it wasn't the live session. It was, let me just, I'll just get the name of it from the content. It was 2 words totally changed my drawing style. 2 words totally changed my drawing method and style. And what that really, it's looking at the development of my thinking over a number of years. And as my thinking changed, as I changed the words I used, because I was starting to change the concepts I was thinking in terms of, how my drawings looked totally changed, absolutely totally changed. I really couldn't believe it. And it's interesting because I thought, like, I hadn't looked at these. I've got like thousands of drawings stacked up in great big piles now from just YouTube, and well, not but hundreds, many hundreds. And so I hadn't particularly looked at these early things I'd done. When I looked at them, I thought it's interesting. A couple of things. Firstly, they weren't as good as I remembered them. Because we do improve, whatever level we're at, we do improve if we keep thinking. We don't improve automatically. Practice doesn't necessarily improve what we do, because we can practice carelessly. We can practice just out of habit and routine and not bringing creativity to what we're doing. When I first started painting, after I'd painted for a while, and I could see, if you like, the first phase of improvement I had. Like I'd learnt stuff, and I began to be able to put it into practice. The skills weren't as developed as they would become, but I could see that I'd learnt some things. I began to sort of almost set up a production line, thinking, I can do lots of small paintings and sell them at markets and things. And what happened was I disconnected from the creative thinking process and was just doing some very routine things. And they looked terrible. They looked boring, they looked dull, and they looked unexciting. Because my thinking, my creative thought processes weren't there. I really had just set up a production line, and it really did come out in what I did. And it's the same with our drawing. It comes from how we're thinking. But I think particularly for me, because I was trying to make all these drawing videos as well, I was always thinking, why am I doing what I'm doing? I was thinking this because I was needing to put it into videos. I was thinking, what are my reasons? Where am I going with it? And I think that just kept me very aware of technique, but not technique in terms of the actual ink on the paper, technique in terms of what am I trying to achieve? Kept me very focused on these aims that came from my head, including how do I translate this reference onto the paper? And that then drove technique, because I wasn't trying to draw the technique. I was trying to draw the drawing that was in my head, and the technique that I settled on became the means of doing that. Ian learned to draw with a 20-cent Bic pen. Absolutely. In some ways, when we draw with a Bic pen and we're drawing on the back of a sheet of A4 paper that has something printed on the other side that we don't need, sometimes they're our best drawings. And the reason is because we're free just to play around and experiment and to take risks. And because we're not being precious, our creativity can run further more easily. You ever notice that? Yeah, when you get the sheet of big white special thick heavy paper and you've got your expensive pen where the ink's so costly you're afraid to use it, it can be very hard to do anything that captures the same sort of buzz our little freehand on the back of something with an old pen that we just pick up is. And it's to do with confidence. It's to do with being free to experiment and take risks, and it's to do with being free to let our thinking run and just go with it, because we've got nothing to lose. That's the attitude we want to have with every drawing. It's why when people say to me, what's the best materials to use? I say, use the pens and the paper you can buy easily, you can afford easily, and you can afford to waste. Because if we're more concerned about the wasting valuable art products than we are about our drawing, we've got the wrong products. We have to have something that we don't worry about using up at all. And I think this partly happens because we're more concerned about artworks than learning to draw far too early. Far too early. We shouldn't worry about artworks till our drawings consistently start to turn out, consistently start to capture things. Because until that happens, then we really are definitely still in the learning phase. And to be focused on artworks is like a pianist, is like starting to learn the piano, and I'm focused on giving a concert at the end of the 2-hour session or the end of the 15-minute session than I am in actually developing skills. So really important. Biggest influences for the evolution of my style of drawing. Look, it was really just this one Australian guy, Lloyd Rees. I mean, I haven't studied drawing. I'm sort of self-taught, so I haven't studied drawing. There's a few people on Instagram whose drawings inspired me. But I'd already sort of developed my own Instagram drawing style then, which is very different to my freehand drawing that I do for YouTube, because for Instagram, I wasn't drawing freehand in ink. I was drawing with pencil under drawings with a 4x4 grid on the references and on my paper. So a very definite style developed, but it's not a style that you'd necessarily look at my freehand drawings that I'm doing now, sort of 3, 4, 5 years later for YouTube, and think, oh, that's the same artist. I don't think you'd actually necessarily pick them as being the same artist. And it's because the thinking process and what I was aiming to do was very different for those big Instagram drawings than for my current YouTube freehand drawings. So again, it shows that the style we develop comes from our mind, comes from our thinking, comes from the creative intentions. Ian saying much of his school books have way more drawings in them than actual classwork. Yeah, I think a lot of us know that. Mine had lots of little drawings of the Titanic tucked into all sorts of places, or sometimes inside covers and so forth. Yeah. All drawn with great freedom, and a few little made up Greek temples too, I think, indicating my early interest in architecture. So if I'm wanting to, I mean, how do I develop a drawing style? I would say that the best way to develop it is to stop thinking about it and to think about improving, and to not worry about the style of other artists yet, because I need to find because before I can do that helpfully, I need to find my own natural rhythm, my own natural starting point with my drawing. I need to put my brain and my eyes to the challenge of drawing and see, as I said, where my natural starting point is. We don't all start at the same place. Even if we have never drawn in our lives before, and we all start on the same day, the first time we try and do a drawing, some people's drawings are going to look, in some obvious way, better than others. And this is where I think we unhelpfully start to think, oh, they've got more talent, I've got no talent, I'm never going to be as good as them. It will always be easier for them than it will be for me because they've obviously got more talent. And I don't think that's really true at all. I don't think talent is a thing that gives advantage to someone. I think talent might be a word that's describing the fact that when we start to draw, some of us have already developed more skills, and this can happen at the age of 5 or 20 or 50. But some of us have developed skills in life in general that are more helpful in drawing than the skills that other people have happened to develop in their life. Does that make sense? And so I may have learnt to observe more carefully for another reason, not to do with drawing, but to do with the fact that I loved that subject more and more. I might have developed good fine motor skills because I don't know, I liked sewing and I had to get the stitches right. It might have been another creative endeavor that has nothing to do with drawing, or it might have been something that's got nothing to do with obvious the way we think of creativity and how it's expressed. So some people start further along than others, which says nothing except good luck to them. But we all can start to improve on day one by careful, thoughtful, intentional practice and by critiquing whatever we draw to get a focus for the next lesson, and to be not thinking about producing artworks, but to be thinking, I'm learning a skill. So I need to have strategies that are good learning strategies and not worry about what I produce, in the way that if I started to learn the piano today, and I got to say, I can't play the piano. I've paid for lessons for all my children. My wife can play really nicely, but I can't play the piano. I've never played the piano. But if I was going to learn the piano, I wouldn't sit down to play pieces. I'd be doing fragments of exercises to start to develop the skills that I need. And I think drawing is actually not as different from that as perhaps people would think. I think what puts more pressure on us when we draw is that at the end of our, if you like, learning session, the drawing is there to be seen. Whereas at the end of our piano practice session, well, it's all gone. You know, if you weren't in the next room having to endure it, it's all gone, and no one sees it, and we don't have to think about it. Whereas having the drawings at the end is confronting, because if I don't have the right attitude towards the learning process, I may well think that it somehow elevates me or puts me down by the result. And so I become very focused on how this looks. And because artists produce artworks and all that, it's very unhelpful thinking at the start. Really helpful to think, I'm learning to draw, and what I need to do is to find out what my starting point is, because when I find it, I can then start to adjust it. And I realized that's what happened to me, even more than I thought, from those first YouTube video drawings that I did. I don't know, 2022. I think I began to draw freehand for YouTube. Maybe it was the end of 2021, but I think it was 2022. And then over the next couple of years, as I kept doing it, as I kept drawing consistently, as I kept bringing my full creative thinking to it, as I kept thinking, not how can I change my style, but how can I how can I produce drawings, how can I create drawings that more capture what's exciting me in the reference or in front of me, and then thinking, how do I do that? And then looking at my drawings, particularly the ones that worked well. I mean, it's easy to focus on critique our drawings and we work out what's not right. But actually, there is a point where there's less, if we do that well, there's less and less in our drawings that's not right. And there's more and more in our drawings that's starting to look like what we were hoping for. And maybe it's just in a part of the drawing, the overall drawing, but you think, oh, it's a shame I didn't do more of this, you know. Well, that's the focus that really starts to take our drawing along, where we start to get glimpses of the promise of the marks that we might be able to make. And we can hone in on both choosing subjects that let us explore that more and then get practice at that. And now we've got a sense of direction. And that will overflow into other subjects as well. Not just, let's say we've finally turned the corner on trees and we're starting to draw trees, put marks on the paper that start to really bring a sense of, hey, this is a tree. I mean, what we learn there will overflow into other areas, not just trees. Because if we go deep and have success in one area, then we learn the process that we need to learn, because drawing is a skill we need to learn. Learning is a skill. How to learn is a skill. And so if we learn how to learn well with one subject, whether it's trees or faces or whatever, we actually develop skills that we can then use in other areas. But starting to see what works as well as what doesn't work is how we start to develop our thinking. And remember, it's our thinking that produces marks on the paper that create the scene. So we need to get consistent marks to create visually a consistent effect, which is what we then say, well, that's my style or that's their style. But that's going to come from consistent thinking. And can you see why I was saying it's so important that we don't expose ourselves from a teaching point of view to too many voices? Because the voices aren't saying consistent things to us about how to draw in the drawing process, except maybe coincidentally. And therefore, if we're getting inconsistent input, it's going to make it very hard for us to think consistently and therefore then to get consistent output. Does that all make sense? I've never quite thought of it in that way before, but I think that says perhaps quite clearly what I'm thinking of. Just a couple of comments would be, I love the piano example, a great example of how crazy it is to think our first drawing should be great or we just don't have it. Absolutely. We put so much pressure on ourselves, and I guess social media is good and bad. It's helpful and not helpful, and depending on our personality, I can, for anything, I can plan to do anything, whether it's, I don't know, learn how to abseil or play the clarinet or do watercolor, and straight away I can find video clips of maybe the best person in the world at any of those things. And that can either be discouraging or encouraging depending on the way we think and whatnot. So we need to be careful. What's Auntie Travel saying? I'm putting together a starting drawing kit for my school-age nephew. What limited pencil selections would you choose? I think I'm going back to my oil painting days for this, because I haven't really used color particularly since then. But I would think in terms of warm and cool. So for every, for green, you want some warm greens and cool greens. You want some warm blues and cool blues and so forth. You want some warm grays and cool grays. But depends on the pencils you use too. And it depends on the age of your nephew, whether he's like 4 or 14. Because the more expensive pencils you buy, the more pigment, the more actual color is in them, and usually they're softer, so you can almost start to get almost sort of a pastel type blending effect too. But if it, but I would suggest warm and cool, because if we're working in color, for me, that was a key point, was actually realizing that all colors divided into warm and cool. And then I could start to explore the possibilities when you combined warm with warm and cool with cool, and see how they look. Not so good when you tried to combine warm and cool, except when you wanted that more awkward color impact. So yeah, I think that's what I would say, but not too many. One of the biggest mistakes people make when they start painting is they buy too many paints. And I think that's particularly because often it's the colors that, no one really buys that end up being priced to clear. And so we buy them because they're really cheap and we think it's a bargain, but it actually is confusing. It's like, again, let's think back to the piano. When we start to learn the piano, we start with just a couple of notes, 2, 3, 4 notes. I'm not sure how many. We don't start with all the notes. We just start with a few and we learn to combine those notes with the skills we need to combine the notes to play them and combine them well. That's what we do. And I think it's the same when we draw. When we paint, the fewer colors we have, the more quickly we actually learn what color's all about in this medium and how to use it, how to manipulate it. Thanks, Joshua. That's great. Appreciate that. Joshua saying he learns a lot from the videos. Appreciate that. That's my intention. I mean, I want to be a good artist myself. I want to produce good drawings, but in terms of YouTube, I want to produce good videos. I actually want to be a good teacher more than I want to be a good artist, which is, yeah. Because I was once a teacher, and for like voice issues, I couldn't teach more than a few years in front of a class. And so I haven't actually taught in front of a class since 1982. Probably most of you weren't born then. Maybe your parents weren't born then. But it's nice to be able to connect back with teaching. And my hope is that anyone watching my videos doesn't get to be as good as me, but gets to be better than me, because that's the sign of being a good teacher. So yeah, but consistency is so important, which is another reason why when consistency is so important in developing our own style, because our marks will only have the coherence of a style if they come from the same place. And by the a few people telling me on the chat now that they remember 1982. Good on you. Our marks come from our thinking, and so our thinking has to be consistent, has to be in the same place. And this is again why I was saying earlier about the importance of being careful how many voices in terms of teaching drawing we listen to, how many videos we watch. That's a really important thing, because the voices don't necessarily say compatible things. They may teach styles or techniques or ways of thinking that are contradictory to each other, and each of them could be brilliant in its, for a particular person, but all of them together will just be confusing and will lead to an inconsistency in mark making. Charcoal seems an obvious choice for learning expressive drawing, but I'm finding it difficult to manage as a beginner. Oh, charcoal is so much fun. It is so expressive. And it certainly has challenges. But if what you want to do is to become really good, Jay, at charcoal drawing, like if you want that to be your main kind of creative base, at least at this point, then start with it and learn with it. And then if at some stage, if you go deep in charcoal, at some stage in the future you want to do pen or pencil or whatever, then you'll find there are skills you've learned that are transferable. And they won't be the skills of the charcoal on the paper. They'll be the skills that you learn in your mind. And because, as I was saying at the very start of this session, if you missed it, that and please remember the like button too, if you're finding this interesting and helpful. That helps me. But because at the start I was saying how sort of 80-90% of our drawing comes from how we think. If we want consistency in our drawings, we have to have consistency in our thinking. And that only happens as we think and as we stay in our own place. If I'm focused on other people's styles, if I'm trying to just like grab marks that I think work well in their drawings and somehow force them into my drawing, then they're not coming from the place in my mind that all my other thoughts are coming. They're sort of like being imported from outside, which is often why they then those marks sit awkwardly in my drawing, because they've come from a different place. The way to use and people do ask me this because I'm always saying, don't copy the work of other artists. It's not a learning, it teaches you how to copy. So if learning to copy is what you want to do, if you only ever want to copy the work of other artists, then go for it. I have no problem with anyone doing whatever brings them enjoyment, you know. But copying is a very different skill to being able to draw originally ourselves, to create our own drawings. And usually when people learn to draw, they want to be able to go beyond copying some. We usually start copying. I mean, like, who else in their youth copied, you know, Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse and Scrooge McDuck and Bugs Bunny and, you know. So we usually learn to draw by copying. But at some point, we want to be able to draw our own things. And if all we've ever done is copy, then we haven't developed the way of thinking that we need to develop, the way of observation we need to observe, and all those in the head things that will, as they develop and as they start to fall into a consistent way of seeing our references, of seeing our finished drawing before we've done it, then our marks, then the ink on paper things we do start to become more consistent. But if I'm trying to airdrop some marks from someone else's thinking into the middle of my drawing, if I'm listening to lots of different videos that are inconsistent with each other, they may each be excellent, but they're inconsistent with each other, or there's just sort of slight variation, then I'm not going to get that consistency in thought. I'm not going to get that the kind of the flowing that picks up momentum, which is what should happen if we're doing this drawing in a healthy, not a healthy way, in a good teaching way, then it should pick up momentum and start to pick up speed. And I certainly feel like in my own drawing journey, and yeah, I'm on a drawing journey. If you know, it'd be really good for you to look at that video I did a couple of videos ago on the 2 words that absolutely transformed my method and my style. When I thought in terms of 2 different words to the words I thought of in my mind when I first started to draw, it absolutely transformed how my drawings looked. Because look, it's probably one of the most important videos I've done. So you know, watch it. 2 words that transform my method and style, and it was changing the way I thought. That changed. Thanks, Lance, saying that was a good video. Saying that, yeah, I wasn't saying the words "name like nobody else." I was wanting people to watch the video, but I think the most important thing in the video is all the examples that I give, that I show from those first drawings, and the impact my way of thinking had on how they looked, to when my thinking began to develop and became, look, I'll just say more sophisticated. That's a bit of a I don't know, snobby word, but it became more nuanced, more not necessarily complex, but more subtle, and certainly required more thought and more challenge in my mind before the ink hit the paper. And it absolutely revolutionized how my drawing looked. And it happened by degrees. It wasn't like I didn't hear this somewhere. And it was only later that I realized I'd changed my thinking and I'd changed the words I used. And it's okay, Igor. Well, that's great, Terry. Glad you discovered my art and my channel. There's plenty of back videos to watch. I don't know. I haven't looked at how many there are lately, but it's probably getting close to 900, I would guess, which is a bit stupid. But I'm having fun doing them. So, but yeah, I think, so what goes on the paper comes from how we're thinking. I think the other problem that makes it hard to develop our style is impatience. Because if we start at the end, if I get really inspired by a certain artist's drawing, then in that enthusiasm, I can just want my drawing to look like theirs. And so now I start to take shortcuts to have my drawing look like theirs. I guess copying their drawings is the ultimate shortcut. Grabbing sort of chunks and trying to kind of force them on top of my drawings is another way. And I'm actually not I'm not allowing the time to develop my thinking and my own mark making and the consistency. I'm wanting to rush to an artwork, and I think this is maybe where this unhealthy attitude of I'm producing artworks comes from, instead of I'm learning to draw, because we're inspired by artworks, and that's great. And we feel we've got something in us like that, or we want that. And so we because an artwork is a physical piece of paper that we can look at, we want that at the end of our drawing session. Our focus is on what we see. And therefore, when we have a drawing session, we straight away jump into drawing. We straight away jump into the ink on the paper, because that's what it's about. And we haven't understood the process and what's required to put the marks on the paper. We can't see the hours of drawing, that hundreds or thousands of hours drawing that artist has done, practiced, the thinking, the 80-90% of the work, the effort thinking before the pen hit the paper. We only see that end result. And so we want to start at their end, both their end of their maybe 3 decades of experience drawing, but also the end of the particular drawing process they had for that drawing. Because we don't know any better. It's not necessarily because we're impatient or whatever, but we just don't realize, because we can't see any of that when we look at their artwork. And so, and I mean, gosh, if you look at one of my sped up videos, they have to be sped up, because no one's going to watch a 60-minute video if it's a 60-minute drawing. Well, not enough people to make it worthwhile for me to make them. But I mean, I spend the time drawing, but to actually have all of that at real time on the video is just not feasible. And so it looks even easier, because the picture just, appears like magic, and you even lose the pauses where I was thinking, because I edit them out as a way of condensing things. Which is why I think my current series I have at the moment on 10-minute real-time drawing videos, where the first 10 minutes, and then maybe just a couple of minutes sped up after that, but the first 10 minutes are in real time of relatively simple things. But even as a daily drawing exercise, not as an artwork producing thing, but as a daily drawing exercise. And so trying to keep them simpler, but the fact that we want to finish them in 15 minutes does help keep the subject simpler. But you get to see, when I pause in my thinking, you get to see me draw a line, and then the pen stops because, oh, that line's not right, and how will I kind of cover this up a little bit? And you see me make adjustments that are all very helpful for understanding process. Even in my normal videos, though, if they're sped up too much, you lose all of that, or I edit the gaps out. So it's helpful to see them, because that's part of the reality. But clearly, when we just look at an artwork in a book or on social media or something, then we really don't get any of that, and we just somehow want that. Now, what's on the paper comes from how we think. My drawings now, the ones I do that are just exercises that take longer, where I'm thinking artwork and I'm thinking creating something that works and is coherent. That comes from it's changed. How they look changed, because my thinking has changed. My understanding of the process has changed. What I'm trying to achieve has changed. I'm not trying to copy the photo, because I just realized more and more just how many weaknesses photos have. And I think it's a great shame that so often we sell our creativity short by thinking, particularly when we start to draw, by thinking that my aim is to produce the photo as accurately as possible, that somehow the more accurate I am in regards to the photo means the more successful my drawing is. And I think that shows a failure to understand a few things. Firstly, the nature of photography versus the nature of drawing, but also the input of my creativity, of our own, each creativity in what we do. One of the things that used to really surprise me at first with my Instagram drawings was the number of comments I'd get saying something like, oh, I love all the detail you draw. I love, it's the impossible detail you draw, but when I zoom in, it's not there. And it was actually that comment repeatedly being made that made me realize, yeah, I don't draw the detail, do I? But it looks like I've drawn it. And that's actually part of how I began processing this whole draw the effect of the detail, not drawing the detail. I did start to develop it first with my painting, because it's very hard to do things reversed, which is what happens with this. I did begin to think of it with my with my painting, because I'm not painting the leaves. I'm trying to paint the effect of the leaves. And I realized when I began to draw with pencil and was drawing trees that I had to do the same thing. It was a bit easier with pencil because you can kind of get sort of smudgy lines and whatnot. But when I began to draw only freehand in ink, it was a bit more challenging because it was a very hard line, which doesn't seem particularly suited for creating foliage effects, which is why I think part of the reason why I think trees can cause so much headache for beginners at drawing. The principle's really the same for everything, whatever it is, but some subjects, yeah, I'll just have a look at this. Accuracy is only critical when you're drawing medical instructions. Yeah. Well, when I'm drawing a dome, I like the right-hand side of the dome to be as accurate as the left-hand side of the dome, which is harder for a right-handed person, and it's harder when you can't move the paper because you've got it all clamped in place with a camera overhead. But yeah, I get your point. Yeah. We're not trying to create accuracy of the details. We're trying to accurately capture the effect of the details, and that's the difference. We do want accuracy, but it's not accuracy of form, of shape, of detail. It's accuracy of overall effect. And so if we start looking at our photos, not asking what's in it, what forms are there, but we think, what's the effect that I'm seeing, that I'm wanting to capture? Because then not just am I now going to have the challenge of translating this effect, this visual effect, into marks, but I've also got the creative challenge and opportunity of manipulating now what I see, manipulating the visual effects when I put them on paper to go further, to create a further effect, better effect. So this is all the thinking. My best drawings, I think, are the ones where I've taken an effect, a visual effect that's in my reference, and I've made it stronger in my drawing. Why wouldn't we do that? This is the privilege, the opportunity we get as artists, that we're not limited by our photo. And photos have a lot. I mean, I follow photographers. Photos are great. Good photos are amazing. But if they're my reference, they will have a lot of weaknesses, depending on the subject, more or less. Certainly with trees, they have a huge number of weaknesses that I don't have to copy in my drawing. I can actually look at my reference, I can visualize the reality, work out the reality, and then capture the effect of that reality using my reference as a springboard, but not limited by its weaknesses. Lance's saying, watched your 10-minute vids, waited a day and drew the reference photo with a different medium, soluble ink with a Feud pen and water. I should try a Feud pen one day. I follow a guy on Instagram, Marek, a Canadian guy, and I love his work. And he seems to live, breathe, and eat Feud pens. So I should maybe try one day to force my own thinking, naming that tune with my own marks. What a great idea. What an absolutely great idea, Lance. To be inspired, to get encouragement, enthusiasm, input, but to make it your own very quickly by using a different medium. That's a great. I've not thought of that. Good on you. Another comment, that's a great mind shift to draw the effects of detail. It's unreal looking if you draw the details that we know are there, but certainly can't see it. Yeah, and the truth is, not just is it unreal to draw all the details, but usually we can't draw them well anyway. And so it ends up making our drawing less effective from a few different directions. Depending on the context, too much accuracy might be considered bad manners. Yeah, well, yeah. Yeah. So style comes from how we think. How we think, well, that's at the core of who we are. And that's why in the end, our style should be individual, because it comes from who we are and our thinking. And we need to train our thinking as much as our mark making. And I think, again, when we're beginning to draw, it's easy to make the mistake of thinking that it's all about the marks because we see the marks. It's all about the ink. And so we rush to do that. And then we end up thinking, oh, this doesn't look right. I need to learn how to draw a pen, use a pen better. I need to learn better technical skills. That must be, or I need to get a different brand of pen. Because our focus often at the start is, understandably enough, on the marks on the paper. We think that's where the improvement will happen. And instead it's instead, the marks come from how we think. And so I need to improve how I think. I need to engage with and embrace the whole process more. Where did my drawings come from? You know, how did in my mind, my drawing style improve over the last 2.5 years? Well, I think on day one, when I began drawing in ink, I think I had good technical skills on that day, because I developed them really doing a couple of years of intensive pencil drawing before then. And I don't think my technical skills, my ability to draw, I mean, I drew some lovely, quite nice straight lines, lots of them parallel to each other in those early drawings, nice, big, thick black lines. But I certainly could control the pen. I didn't have a problem with that. But what changed was not my technical skills. What changed was my thinking over a number of years about understanding the process of what I was doing. My thinking changed with what I could see in my reference. My thinking changed with what I was wanting to create, because I began to be able to see further. It's a bit like if you go down a road in the dark with a torch, say, the further down you go, then the further you can see. Like, I can't see what's 10 kilometers ahead when I start, but when I've walked 9.5 kilometers down the road with my very strong torch, then perhaps I can see 10 kilometers ahead when I've walked down. So we can't see things we'll be able to see further on at the start. What a good point. I've actually never used this or even thought this before. I've certainly never put it in those words. But so we can, yeah. We as we get further, we can see further. We can see possibilities that we weren't able to see at the start. And so I can see possibilities now in my drawing, possibilities, challenges, whatever, in my drawings, in when I go to draw now that I couldn't see a couple of years ago, and my freehand ink drawing style looked very different to how it looks now, because my thinking then was different. I was using different words in my head. I had different goals in my head because I wasn't aware enough of the possibilities that ink drawing these subjects on paper gave me. I wasn't aware of the possibilities, but as I moved down the path, as I, if you like, walked into the darkness with the torch, the further I got, I could see new things that I could only see from that point. I could never see those from the starting point. So yes, look, people are just saying this is a helpful way of thinking. Yes, I'm really quite pleased about it myself. Maybe I'll do a whole video on this at some point. But yeah, and so the other thing from that we get, of course, is that at the start we need to have a few things in mind, and maybe this would be a helpful video. But you know, we should be firstly kind on ourselves. You know, I don't know why, but if we were to start to learn the piano, we wouldn't be surprised if we hit wrong notes. We wouldn't kind of say, "Oh, I've clearly got no ability in this at all. I'm not going to learn the piano. Look, 3 of those 20 notes were wrong." Well, we don't do that because we understand that you're going to hit wrong notes. But somehow with drawing, if our drawings don't look really nice right from the start, we're starting to think, "Oh, this was a mistake. I thought I could do this, but clearly I can't. Clearly I have no talent, so I'm going to give up." We think unhelpful ways, and but with the piano, of course, as we master these notes, we add new notes, and as we master those notes, we don't just add more notes, but we add more complexity in the way we play them. And it's all exactly the same with our drawing. All exactly the same. We start to not just find new marks, but new ways of combining them, new ways of thinking. And as I've said a few times now, it was my changing the way I thought about the whole process, and therefore giving a whole lot more time to thinking is what revolutionized my drawing. And it's not that when I say it's like 80% thinking and 20% drawing, I don't mean it's that I spend, let's say that I spend an hour drawing, that I've spent 4 hours thinking before I put the pen on paper. I'm weighting the importance, as in WEIGHT, weighting the importance, and no, weighting, as in you weight something, you give it more value, not weighing. Just having an off-screen family member disagreeing with my choice of word there. But it's the relative importance. But of course, I've put that work into it. And the good thing about thinking work is that you don't have to be drawing to do it. I draw a lot of my drawings when I don't have a pen in my hand, when I'm not even necessarily home, because when I'm out, I'm seeing things and I'm thinking how, and because I'm always trying to take photos for YouTube video references, and I'm thinking, how would I convert this? What marks would I use? What combination of marks would I bring together to create this? So we can do this creative thinking all the time as well, and I do, because it's kind of my focus in life at this point. And we don't always have space in our life for that, and it's often not appropriate anyway, depending what other commitments we have. But it's worth remembering, though, that we can do the thinking part of our drawing at other times, and then when we do sit down to draw, we've got that. And I think this also is partly how we use the work of other artists. I think it's really unhelpful to focus on, except in a very general, this inspires me to want to learn to draw way. But when we actually do start to learn to draw, not to have their drawings there and be trying to, even if we don't try and copy the drawing, actually copy their marks. far better to be inspired, put that away, get my reference, start to develop, undistracted by other people's drawings, my own way of thinking, of learning to observe the things I need to observe, of learning what marks I need to make to create whatever effect I want to create. And once we've started to develop a consistency in that, a consistency in how our drawings look, because that means we're starting to firm up the choices we make in this 80% in our head versus 20% ink on the paper kind of thing. Yeah, when every drawing looks different, it means I have no consistency in my mind with the choices I make. And I need to start to get that happening, because that consistency will be my starting point. It's not what my style's going to be, but it's going to be the start of being able to make choices about what will improve my drawing, finding my natural starting rhythm in this, and then move on from that and develop it. And when I've got a consistent drawing style, I don't even have to like it, but I can see it's consistent. Then I think I can look at the work of other artists who inspire me and not sit down with their drawing and then try and copy it myself, but to look at it and to really start to analyze, why do I like it? Not to try and appropriate it, but to actually incorporate what they've done into my thinking. Because if I absorb into my thinking their drawing, not try and copy their marks onto my paper. This is an important point. Not to try and copy their marks onto the paper. But if I try and absorb their drawing technique into my thinking, then the very next time I go to draw, their technique will start to influence my thinking. And then it will start to become expressed on my paper, in my drawing, in a coherent way with all the other marks, because it's all being filtered through the lens of my thinking. I think that's the helpful way to use the drawings of other artists. And I've got a few artists where I think I have done that. Kind of like the inner game of tennis, I guess. So, okay, a question from me too. Actually, I do have a question on why in head I can draw it and it turns out okay to put it on paper or an iPad doesn't even resemble it in my head. Well, I think we don't have to be as precise in our head, I think is the answer. On paper is far more challenging, far more confronting, because in our imagination, we talk about seeing things in our imagination, but we don't really see them. We're imagining them. And we can always imagine more than we're able to create. It's just the way, our brain is such incredible potential possibilities of thinking that we can always, if you like, dream dreams that go beyond all reality. We can imagine, universes uncharted. We can look at Hubble space photos and we can kind of see things that we can't see. And that shouldn't be a reason to be discouraged, simply a recognition that our imagination is incredibly powerful, and that's great. And we should use our imagination, we should use our ability to think, but not to be discouraged by the fact that we will never be able to capture on paper the things that we can dream of in our mind. And that's great, because it means we will always have somewhere further to go with the next drawing. We will never arrive at the destination. We will never say, well, I've done everything that I can do. It was interesting. I had a friend once who did some drawing did a course, did some drawing, I think like a local community college course. And I hadn't realized they were doing it. They had no interest in drawing, to my knowledge, before that. And I was like, oh, these are great. But when I made a comment about where to next, they said, oh no, I've done this. I think I've done as well as I can. And I thought, Well, if that's what you think, you have. So, but it's just a shame. I thought there was a lot of promise in where they got. Not that there's any reason why we have to draw. We all have other things we can do as well. But yeah, it does come down to a way of thinking, and they'd stopped seeing possibilities clearly at that point. They were happy with what they'd done, and they were happy to move on to something totally different. But as long as we can even just sort of feel there's more in our head that we can get onto the paper, then we've always got somewhere else to go with our style. And yes, our progress can keep chugging on. In my head, it's 5 or 6D. On paper, it's 2D. Yeah, yeah. And look, we should be encouraged that we've got the imagination, and that's great because that is the starting point. Like, that's what I've been saying. It's in here that everything flows, and that's why we shouldn't rush to do this. It's why we should give our imagination a chance to look at a reference and to suck out of it all the things that inspire us, and then to start to translate that into whatever marks I'm able to make with whatever I'm using on whatever I'm drawing on. It really is a translation process, but we don't even have to translate it exactly. We can actually have it say something totally different if we want, because we can. Yeah. As soon as you make a mark, your imagined drawing starts to blow away like smoke. Yeah, but sometimes, well, we can maybe not if you're a beginner so much, but we can reach a point where, yep, the imagined drawing starts to drift away, but we start to see something as the smoke clears that we hadn't seen before, that we can actually call out of our initial marks. And we actually, I mean, I've begun lots of drawings, and I've finished with a different feeling drawing to the one I started, because I didn't see all the possibilities until they began to appear. And then I began to see, hey, there are better options than I had first thought with this. So again, this is part of the hang loose and be creative, and don't be fixated on the end until we get to the end. You know, it's another good reason to make sure we finish every drawing. This is a different topic, but so many people give up their drawings halfway through, either because they took on something too ambitious and they've been drawing for 3 hours. They're now exhausted. It's going to be another month before they have another 3 hours to draw, and then they'd rather start a new drawing. It's sort of like the drawing equivalent of all those knitters who have lots and lots of half-finished jumpers, you know, filling up bags and cupboards and things. It's always more exciting to start something else when you have time again to think about doing it. But there are things we learn in the second half of the drawing that we only actually use, and therefore we only develop those skills, that way of thinking, in the second half of the drawing. There are second half of the drawing skills. And if I never get halfway through a drawing, then I never learn them. It doesn't matter whether halfway through the drawing is 10, 20, 60, 500 minutes. If I'm never in the second half of the drawing, I don't learn them. And so if I want to learn to draw, I have to learn to think the way you think when you start to complete a drawing. Because just as there are skills we need when we start a drawing, establishing proportions and keeping those tight and accurate and whatnot, there are skills that we only have in the second half of the drawing. So, and they're obviously very important to our drawing style as well. And so if I never finish my drawings, that may be one of the reasons I don't develop a consistent style, because I've failed to realize that the whole drawing process from start to finish has differences in it. And if I always sit in this beginning space and never in this ending space, then I don't learn the thinking and the creative translation of thought into marks, and then of bringing all the marks together in a coherent way that creates whatever effect I had in my head. Or at this stage, Looking at, are there any unexpected choices, opportunities that I now have that I didn't expect that I can manipulate to increase the overall effect, or even to shift the overall effect of my drawing. Yeah. Well, look, I hope this has been helpful. Please, if you haven't hit the like button till now, please give it a hit. That would be great. And yeah, thank you. I've really enjoyed this. Are there any last comments before I go? If you have just a general question about drawing, I'm always happy to answer one or two of those. I hope it's encouraged anyone who's been struggling to find their drawing style, feeling like every drawing looks different, and maybe unhelpfully thinking that copying, trying to copy in some way the style of artists who inspire them might help their drawings look like their drawings, but only if our thinking ends up the same as their thinking, because our thinking produces the drawings, and we have to have confidence that we're going to be able to. We really need to have confidence that our brain can develop this way of thinking, but we shouldn't underestimate the amount of work and effort it's going to be. It's going to be intense effort at times, and we're going to have to push through the times it doesn't work. When you learn the piano, if you got discouraged and stopped after you had 4 or 5 or 6 bad notes, or if you couldn't play a tune on the first, second, or third lesson, you couldn't play a recognizable tune, you couldn't play like a pianist who inspired you, well, you wouldn't give up, because you kind of know it's going to take more than that work. Well, same with drawing. You know, if the inspiration is within you, I believe you've got something in you to bring out. If you're wanting to draw, it's because there's something in you that part of you at least knows is good, and you're wanting to exercise this as part of who you are. Effort is a big part. Thanks, Terry. Effort is a big part of getting a style, because we need to persevere. It comes from consistency, you know. And again, as I said, we don't get consistency if I'm always rushing from one teacher, one video teacher, to another video teacher, because they're not thinking the same way, and that's why their drawings look different. I don't get consistency if I keep copying the work of other artists, because I get nothing to incorporate in my thinking, and the skill I'm developing is not really a skill I want for drawing my own drawings. But in the short term, I get a better looking drawing more easily, and that can make it very tempting. Makes it very tempting to copy the work of other artists, because if in my thinking I'm drawing because I want to have nice drawings at the end of it, then that gives me the rather short-term goal that I have. But I soon learn that it doesn't equip me to draw my own, and then I can get discouraged when in fact I just started down a bit of a dead-end street. I just need to back up a bit and get back on the path, and start at the beginning, and not start thinking I'm going to have an artwork, but start thinking I'm learning a skill, and I can. Thank you for reflecting on this topic. I think it's often overlooked, causing a lot of stress. Yeah, thanks, Margot. Appreciate that. Shimura, I'd like to say thank you. Your videos are very informative. Thank you. It's nice to take the time and listen to someone who has a whole lifetime of drawing experience. Well, actually, that's the thing, Shimura. I don't have a lifetime of drawing experience. I did a little bit of drawing on a trip in 2006, and I showed some of those in a previous video. And then I really started in 2018. I've been drawing for 6 years. Yeah, I did a little bit of scribbling in books and stuff when I was a kid. Used to copy cartoons and stuff, Donald Duck and Disney and Bugs Bunny and stuff. And then did nothing for most of my life for all sorts of reasons. So it's not, but I've been out because of my stage of life and whatnot. I've been able to give a lot of time to it now, and a lot of effort and thought. So you don't necessarily have to spend a lifetime of doing it. But as I said, I painted for 10 years full time before I began drawing as well. So that helped a huge amount, because I went deep in oil painting, and that then gave me skills that gave me a head start, if you like, when I started to draw. The way I talked earlier in this video about when we might all be starting to learn to draw, but we don't all start at the same place because life has given each of us other skills. Yeah, thanks, Shimra. And the other thing though is if you go back to that video I made a couple of videos ago, 2 words that transform my drawing style and something else. You'll see that the drawings I did 2.5 years ago are so different to the drawings I do now. So much more kind of, lots of accuracy, but clunky, stilted, more wooden, I think, than the drawings I do now, because and yet people thought my drawings were great then. But I feel like they're so much better now because I've really been able to develop my thinking about the drawing process, the drawing in ink, directly freehand in ink process, and develop a style that works for that. And then that style has developed over 2 to 3 intense years of putting it into practice. And because of the videos, and I'm having to teach it all the time, that forces me to actually analyze what I'm doing a lot more. And if you like, I get to benefit from my teaching model ahead of everyone else because I become aware of the sort of creative process that happens in my head that informs my marks, so that I can say them on camera. But that means I'm explicitly aware of them myself, and I get to put them all into practice all the time. And that's why I think I have confidence with my drawing model that it will at least work for some people well, because it's worked for me well. Card erasing. That's right. And I think I'd still be caught up in elements, levels of perfectionism if I hadn't tackled it head on by saying, I'm going to draw in ink because then I can't erase anything. I'm fed up with spending more time erasing lines than actually drawing them. And it's just making me more and more nervous and more, is this line right? Is it wrong? And I'm sick of that. I want more freedom in my drawing. So how do I change that? Well, I change it. I make erasing an impossibility. And so, yeah, it worked with some other changes. It worked incredibly well for me. I've got some videos on dealing with perfectionism. So have a look for those if that's a problem for you, because it can really derail our drawing process because it distracts us from learning to draw and makes us focus on having an artwork at the end. And all the time we're sort of focused on, have I spoiled it? Have I spoiled it? Have I spoiled it? Have I spoiled it? And then if we do, there's usually some sort of significant self-condemnation to it. And we honestly end up so tense that it becomes really easy to do something that's not quite right. Or the pressure that we will means we abandon drawings halfway through, even though we haven't made a mistake because we're so fearful that we will. So, perfectionism is, well, it's not a great thing for life, but it's particularly unhelpful for drawing. So really encourage you having a look at some of those videos that might just help give some strategies to lessen its impact or step out of it completely. Anyway, look, thanks to everyone. Hour and a half, that's certainly long enough. It's 9:30 in the morning here in Sydney. I don't know what time it is. I assume that for most of you, if it's morning for me, it's going to be nighttime for you, because that seems to be how it works for most of the world. But look, thanks for joining. Really appreciate it. If you haven't hit the like button and you're still watching at this point, then please give it a tap for me now. And I'll see you next video. Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.